Think you know the whole story? Turns out you were probably taught the half-truth. Welcome to Half-Truths. There is a moment we have all experienced, usually sitting in a dull computer lab or procrastinating on our phones late at night. You click on a link that promises to tell you who you really are. It is a quiz. Maybe it asks you to look at a spinning dancer and tell you which way she is rotating. Maybe it asks if you prefer algebra to poetry or if your desk is messy or organized. You click the buttons, the little progress bar fills up, and finally, the algorithm delivers its verdict. You are a right-brain thinker. You are creative, intuitive, and free-spirited. Or perhaps you are a left-brain thinker. You are analytical, logical, and detail-oriented. And for a moment, you nod your head. It feels right. It explains why you struggled with calculus in high school or why you can never seem to remember people's names. It is a label that fits comfortably like a well-worn sweater. This concept of being left-brained or right-brained is one of the most pervasive ideas in popular psychology. It has shaped how we teach children, how corporate training seminars are run, and how we define our own identities. We use it as shorthand for our strengths and our weaknesses. We say, I am just not a math person. I am right-brained, as if our neural architecture prohibits us from balancing a checkbook. Or we say, I am not the artistic type. I am left-brained, as if half our skull is devoid of imagination. It is a neat, binary way to categorize the messy complexity of human personality. It offers a scientific-sounding explanation for why we are the way we are. It divides the world into the poets and the engineers, the dreamers and the accountants. It is a story that feels intuitively true because it reflects the dualities we see in society. But what if that story is not just a simplification? What if it is a complete fabrication? What if the idea that you are dominated by one side of your brain is not only scientifically inaccurate, but actually limits what you think you are capable of achieving? What if the entire industry of self-help books, educational theories, and personality tests built on this foundation is based on a game of telephone that went horribly wrong decades ago? Today on Half-Truths, we are going to open up the hood and look at the engine of human thought. We are going to trace this myth back to the Nobel Prize-winning laboratory where it began, see how it mutated in the hands of the media, and discover the far more spectacular reality of how your brain actually works. It is time to forget the border war between left and right. The truth is much more connected than that. Let us start by looking at the world through the lens of this myth. It is difficult to overstate just how deeply embedded this idea is in our culture. If you walk into a bookstore, or perhaps scroll through Amazon, you will find hundreds of titles promising to help you unlock your right brain potential. You will see drawing courses, leadership guides, and parenting manuals, all predicated on the idea that Western society has suppressed the right hemisphere and that we need to liberate it to achieve balance. This narrative suggests that the left brain is the boring bureaucrat. It is the side that handles taxes, grammar, and schedules. It is linear and rigid. The right brain in this story is the wild artist. It is the source of passion, color, and emotional depth. It is holistic and fluid. This duality has become a modern mythology. We use it to excuse our shortcomings and pigeonhole our peers. In the corporate world, this manifests as team-building exercises where managers try to pair a left-brained organizer with a right-brained visionary, assuming this biological diversity will create the perfect product. In education, teachers have been told to differentiate instruction to cater to these distinct brain styles. worried that a lecture might bore the right-brained students or that an art project might terrify the left-brained ones. The appeal is obvious. The world is chaotic, and human behavior is baffling. Anything that offers a clean, biological sorting hat is going to be popular. It turns the terrifying complexity of the 86 billion neurons in your head into a simple coin toss. Heads, you are a scientist. Tails, you are a painter. But to understand why this is a half-truth and not just a lie, we have to acknowledge that it is built on a grain of fact. The brain is indeed divided into two hemispheres. If you look at a brain, it looks like a giant walnut. There is a deep fissure running right down the middle, separating the left side from the right. And it is true that for most people, certain functions are localized. For the vast majority of right-handed people and a good chunk of left-handed people, language processing happens primarily in the left hemisphere. This has been known since the 19th century. Areas like Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which handle speech production and comprehension, sit on the left. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere often takes the lead on spatial attention and face recognition. So, the anatomy is there. The division is real. But how did we get from simple, functional localization to the idea that you can be a right-brained person? How did a map of where functions sit turn into a horoscope for your personality? To find the answer, we have to travel back to the 1960s, to the California Institute of Technology, and meet a man named Roger Sperry. Roger Sperry was a brilliant neuroscientist who was looking for a solution to a devastating problem. He was working with patients suffering from severe, intractable epilepsy. These were people for whom medication did not work. They were plagued by grand mal seizures that would start in one area of the brain and sweep across the entire organ like a wildfire, causing violent convulsions and loss of consciousness. Sperry and his colleagues, including a young Michael Gazzaniga, knew that the seizure activity spread from one hemisphere to the other through a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the bridge. It consists of about 200 million axons connecting the left and right sides. It is the superhighway of information. The doctors had a radical idea. If they cut the bridge, they could stop the wildfire. They hypothesized that by surgically severing the corpus callosum, a procedure called a corpus callosotomy, they could contain the seizure to just one half of the brain. The other half would remain unaffected, and the patient would not lose consciousness. It was a drastic measure, a last resort. They performed the surgery on a small group of patients. Medically, it was a success. The seizures became manageable. The patients could go back to their lives. To the casual observer, these people seemed perfectly normal. They could walk, talk, read, and argue just like anyone else. Their personalities did not seem to change. It appeared that you could slice the brain in half, and the person remained whole. But Sperry and Gazzaniga looked closer. They devised a series of ingenious experiments to test how these split-brain patients processed information. They took advantage of the way the human body is wired. In general, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side. This crossover applies to vision as well, but in a specific way. Everything in your left field of vision goes to your right hemisphere, and everything in your right field of vision goes to your left hemisphere. In a normal brain, this does not matter. The information hits one side and instantly zips across the corpus callosum to the other. The two halves chat constantly, so you perceive a seamless world. But in Sperry's patients, the bridge was out. The phone line was cut. The left hand literally did not know what the right hand was doing. Imagine one of these experiments. The patient sits in front of a screen with a divider so their eyes cannot move. A word flashes on the right side of the screen, say, the word apple. This visual information goes to the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere is where language lives. The researcher asks, "What did you see?" The patient says, "I saw an apple." Easy. Now, the researcher flashes a word on the left side of the screen, say, the word spoon. This information goes to the right hemisphere. Remember, the bridge is cut. The right hemisphere cannot send this info to the left hemisphere, where the speech center is. The researcher asks, "What did you see?" The patient says, "Nothing. I didn't see anything." The left hemisphere, which is doing the talking, truly did not see anything. But here is the kicker. The researcher then asks the patient to reach under a table with their left hand, which is controlled by the silent right brain, and pick out the object they saw from a bag of items. The patient's left hand feels around and grabs the spoon. When asked why they are holding a spoon, the patient looks confused. The left brain, the storyteller, has no idea why the left hand grabbed the spoon, so it makes something up. It confabulates. It says, "Oh, I grabbed the spoon because I wanted some soup." These experiments were groundbreaking. They showed that the two hemispheres could operate independently and had different strengths. The left was the interpreter, the linguist, the logical explanations maker. The right was better at spatial tasks, face recognition, and rudimentary emotional processing, but was largely mute. Sperry won a Nobel Prize for this work in 1981. It was legitimate, world-changing science. But then, the telephone game began. The nuance of these experiments was lost almost immediately when the findings left the lab and entered the public imagination. Science writers and journalists looked at these results and saw a metaphor too juicy to resist. They took the clinical observation that the left hemisphere processes language and the right hemisphere processes spatial data, and they extrapolated wildly. If the left handles grammar, they reason, it must be the seat of logic, order, and civilization. If the right handles visual shapes, it must be the seat of creativity, intuition, and wildness. They ignored the fact that these patients had undergone a radical surgery that fundamentally altered their brain architecture. They ignored the fact that in a healthy brain, the corpus callosum is firing constantly. By the 1970s and 80s, the right brain movement was in full swing. It dovetailed perfectly with the counterculture. The left brain became a symbol of the rigid, Western, patriarchal establishment. The right brain was the mystical, Eastern, artistic liberator. Books like Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards became massive bestsellers. To be fair, Edwards' book is an excellent guide to drawing, but its neurological premise that you have to trick your left brain to shut up so your right brain can take over is metaphorical, not biological. Corporate consultants realized they could sell this. They created personality tests based on this dichotomy. They told managers that their engineering teams were too left-brained and needed right-brained thinking workshops. It became a multi-million-dollar industry. The complexity of neuroscience was flattened into a horoscope. You were no longer a person with a complex, integrated mind. You were a type A or a type B, a left or a right. This distortion persists because it offers a comforting excuse. If you struggle with math, it is not because you need more practice or a different teacher. It is because you are right-brained. It is biological destiny. If you cannot draw, it is because you are left-brained. It absolves us of the struggle of learning. It turns a lack of skill into a fixed identity. So, we have established the myth and its origin. Now, let us pull the thread further and look at what modern science actually tells us. What happens when we put a healthy person, someone with an intact corpus callosum, into an fMRI machine and ask them to do something creative or logical? The results are a massive record scratch for the pop psychology gurus. Let us look at math. The myth says math is a left brain activity. And yes, when you perform exact calculations, areas in the left hemisphere are heavily involved. But mathematics is not just arithmetic. It involves visualizing geometry, estimating quantities, and understanding abstract relationships. When you tackle a complex math problem, both hemispheres light up. The right brain helps with the spatial conceptualization of the numbers, while the left handles the linear processing. They are passing the ball back and forth milliseconds at a time. Now, let us look at creativity. This is the holy grail of the right brain movement. They claim the right hemisphere is the artist's studio. But when neuroscientists scan the brains of people writing poetry, composing music, or solving creative problems, they do not see a lopsided glow in the right hemisphere. They see a symphony of activity across the entire brain. Think about writing a novel. You need the wild imagination to invent a plot that involves many networks, but you also need the structure of grammar, the discipline of plotting, and the logic of cause and effect. That is the left hemisphere working overtime. A great artist is not someone with a dominant right brain. They are someone whose left and right brains communicate with exceptional speed and clarity. A study by the University of Utah in 2013 analyzed brain scans of more than 1,000 people aged 7 to 29. They divided the brain into 7,000 distinct regions and looked for lateralization. They wanted to see if some people had a stronger network on the left or the right. They found absolutely no evidence that people possess a dominant side of the brain. None. We all use both sides. The logic centers and the creative centers are not enemies. They are partners. In fact, the most creative acts you perform require the most intense collaboration between the two hemispheres. The aha moment, that sudden flash of insight, is often the result of the brain making a new connection across the hemispheres, linking two previously unrelated concepts. The tragedy of the left brain, right brain myth is that it encourages us to shut down half of our potential. By telling a child they are right-brained, we might inadvertently signal that they shouldn't bother with advanced calculus. By identifying ourselves as left-brained, we might never pick up a paintbrush or try to write a poem, convinced that we lack the hardware for it. The reality of the brain is far more empowering. The brain is plastic. It changes based on how we use it. This is called neuroplasticity. When you practice math, you are not just exercising your left hemisphere. You are strengthening the connections that allow your whole brain to process numerical concepts. When you practice drawing, you are teaching your visual cortex to communicate better with your motor cortex. The separation of logic and creativity is a false dichotomy. Logic requires creativity. You have to imagine the solution to a proof before you can write it down. Creativity requires logic. You have to understand the rules of perspective or the structure of a sonnet to break them effectively. The most brilliant scientists are often deeply creative, and the most enduring artists are often rigorously analytical. Leonardo da Vinci is the perfect example. Was he left-brained or right-brained? He was an engineer who designed flying machines and studied anatomy with clinical precision. He was also a painter who created the Mona Lisa. He did not switch back and forth between two different personalities. He used his whole brain. His art informed his science, and his science informed his art. If we want to understand ourselves, we have to stop thinking in binary code. We are not divided selves. We are integrated systems. The corpus callosum, that bridge that Sperry cut in his Patience, is the most important part of the story. It is the secret weapon. It allows the analytical and the emotional to merge into the conscious experience of being human. When you listen to a piece of music, your right hemisphere might be processing the melody and the pitch, but your left hemisphere is analyzing the rhythm and the lyrics. It is the integration of these two streams that gives you the chills. If you were truly only right-brained in that moment, you would hear the sound but miss the meaning. If you were truly only left-brained, you would count the beats but miss the beauty. The myth of the left and right brain is a relic of a time when we needed simple maps for a complex territory. It was a useful metaphor that outlived its usefulness and became a cage. It suggests that we are born with a mental limitation, that we are cast in a mold we cannot break. But the science tells a different story. It tells us that you are not a type. You are a network. You possess the capacity for both rigorous analysis and boundless imagination. The hardware is there. The connections are waiting to be strengthened. So, the next time someone asks you if you are left-brained or right-brained, or sends you a link to a quiz that promises to reveal your inner cognitive style, you can give them the only scientifically accurate answer. You can tell them that you are whole-brained. We often look to science to categorize us, to tell us where we fit in the grand scheme of things. It is comforting to have a tribe, even if that tribe is determined by a pseudoscientific coin toss. But the lesson here is that we should be wary of any theory that seeks to slice us in half. The human mind is not a dual monarchy with two warring kings. It is a democracy of billions of neurons, all working together to create the singular, undivided experience of you. Now you know the real story. What other half-truths are still out there? If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a comment, and join us next time. Until then, stay curious.